Our next topic under consideration is to respond to the question, why does Luke, unlike any other gospel writer, write a two-volume work of both a gospel and a selective history of the church? Once we have addressed this question, we will do a brief overview of the key literary themes of Luke Acts. So why does Luke write a two-volume work? It actually isn't uncommon for an ancient author to write a two-volume work. For example, the Jewish historian Josephus wrote a two-volume work with a similar prologue as Luke called Against Appian. Luke, however, is unique among the New Testament gospel writers in this regard. Perhaps it is best to point out that one of Luke's overall themes or goals of his work is to demonstrate to Theophilus and his wider audience how this gospel message, deeply rooted in Judaism, reached the Gentiles. If you consider the other three gospel records, particularly the other synoptic gospels, Matthew and Mark, of which Luke is a member, they do not highlight as extensively as Luke does the inclusion of the Gentiles or the outcome of such a mission. Certainly Matthew, the most Jewish gospel, has the Great Commission at the end in which Jesus instructs his disciples to go to all the nations. The writer does not, however, tell us the outcome of that commission. Luke's two-volume work therefore not only gives us a sense of the origin of the gospel and the life and ministry of Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, but also how his ministry is continued in his disciples through the Holy Spirit. Several observations can therefore be made about the purpose of this two-volume work. One, Luke's gospel portrays God as acting in history to show Jesus as the fulfillment of Jewish expectation. Two, the gospel message, however, is for the Gentiles too, and is part of the new thing God is doing in Israel. This is affirmed early in the gospel in Simeon's prophetic proclamation in the temple when he states that the child Jesus will be a light to the Gentiles. Luke demonstrates that this prophetic word is fulfilled through the stories of Acts. Third, this two-volume work gives Luke's Gentile audience a sense of self-understanding and belonging. Luke accomplishes this in a number of ways, but literarily and spatially, by starting his story with a Jewish priest in the holy place of the temple in Jerusalem, and ending his story with the apostle to the Gentiles in the capital of the Roman Empire. Others have suggested that Luke wrote his two-volume work for apologetic purposes. This is certainly a possibility, but I would not suggest it as a main reason. Witherington offers that Theophilus, who may have been a God-fearer, these are Gentiles who followed the Jewish faith, who questioned why Christianity, this would be Theophilus, questioned why Christianity, part of a new Israel, had not been embraced by Judaism, or why the Roman state is persecuting it. It is true that in Luke Acts, Romans are often placed in a positive light. For example, the centurion who had greater faith than anyone in Israel, the centurion at the cross who acknowledges Jesus as a son of God, or the officers in Acts who care so personally for Paul. In addition, the extensive trial sections in Acts constantly portray the Romans as unable to find anything wrong with Paul or his faith. As is suggested by Witherington and Auney, Luke may be attempting to accomplish three things, broadly speaking, besides his goal of showing the gospel reaching the Gentiles. One, Luke provides through his writing a definition for Christianity, since early Christianity was comprised of many groups with a broad spectrum of beliefs and practices. Two, he provides identity to the new faith, which, unlike many Mediterranean religions, was increasingly not tied to any particular ethnic group. Three, Luke legitimizes Christianity by establishing its roots in Judaism. Julius Caesar passed an edict during his reign that all religions older than Rome itself would be protected under Roman law. Judaism had this legal protection, and as long as Christianity was seen as a sect of Judaism, it had this protection. As the years passed, Rome began to see Christianity as a religion apart from Judaism, and thus it was placed under increased scrutiny as a new faith without legitimate claims. Besides the discussion of purpose, we want to consider the literary relationship between these two books. In chapter 3 of your main textbook, Bach discusses the unity of Luke Acts and whether Luke Acts was originally planned by the author to be written as a 2-volume work, or whether Acts, for example, may have been a later addition or afterthought. Bach concludes that Luke and Acts were planned together, and the primary evidence for this is the literary themes that run through the 2 volumes. This semester, as we walk through the 2 books, I will continually highlight the literary themes, which we might also call theological themes of Luke Acts. And you will complete an assignment that will help you focus on these themes. Now, while it seems pretty clear that these 2 books were intended as one work in tandem, Luke and Acts are works within their own right and are books that can stand alone. Both begin with a similar but related prologue, and the gospel is not left open-ended, but concludes with the ascension of Jesus, which is the same event that opens the book of Acts. Listed on the PowerPoint are several of the important themes that we can trace through both Luke and Acts, which we will highlight this semester. First, Luke's prologue, which is found in Luke 1:1-4 and Acts 1:1, is unique to his gospel and is a characteristic of ancient scientific works. We will consider this in more detail in our next lecture. Salvation and the forgiveness of sins. Some scholars say this is the major theme of Luke Acts, and it certainly is important. The cost of discipleship and detachment from possessions. This is a big topic in the teaching of Jesus, but we also see the Jerusalem church in Acts living out this message as well. Rich and poor in the kingdom is the next one. This theme is primarily found in the gospel, but is present in Acts. We will see this theme begin in the very first chapter of Luke, in what is called the infancy narrative. Prayer in the life and ministry of Jesus in the church. This is another major theme. Luke's gospel, more than any other, emphasizes the prayer life of Jesus, as well as his unique teaching on prayer. The practice of prayer continues to be highlighted in Acts. Next, we have Luke's inclusive work, or the universality of the gospel. This would be the inclusion of the Gentiles, which is, of course, particularly noted in Acts. However, in Luke and Acts, we see an emphasis on the participation of Samaritans and women in Jesus' ministry and in the church. As you may know, Samaritans were hated by Jews and vice versa. And in a very androcentric and patriarchal society, women did not often exercise much influence. And then finally, I have what I would propose to you as the theme of Luke Acts, the gospel to the Gentiles. This would be the major theme and purpose, and I have already expressed this earlier in our discussion, and we will continue to note this emphasis as we move throughout the 2 works.